Okay, am I recording? Make sure. All right, good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to do the first part of of our study of one of Nichiren's writings, and this is coming from volume 4 of the writings of Nichiren Shonin. And let me stop the share. And so this is the book that it's coming from, The Writings of Nichiren Shonin, Faith and Practice, Volume 4. And this happens to be the very first letter or Gosho that's in this book. We call Nichiren's writings Gosho. And so I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint presentation. And, back up. Okay, so the title of the letter is Sho Hokke Daimoku Sho, or English is Treatise on Chanting the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. And let me give you some background information, which I did not put on the slide. You'll just have to kind of listen here. So this is was written on the 28th of the 5th month of the first year of Bunno era, or 1260, and was produced at about the same time as the well-known Risho on Kokuron, spreading peace throughout the country by establishing the true Dharma. And the Risho on Kokuron is one of Nichiren's 5 major writings. And I've given several lectures on it, and I need to find out where they are so that I can do them again. So while the Risho on Kokuron was written solely for the purpose of refuting false views, the Sho Hokke Daimoku Sho primarily expounds the merit of chanting the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra. Written during the early years of Nichiren's propagation, this treatise shows the subtle differences in expression from the writings of the Sado and Minobu periods in regard to doctrines and chanting the Daimoku. So this is written before his exile, his last exile, and before his retirement to Minobu. And what they're saying is that when you put this alongside of his later writings on the Daimoku, there's a subtle difference. So this work is an important writing in helping to understand Nichiren Shonin's early concept of Daimoku chanting as a religious practice. Nikko, with 2 Ks, was one of the 6 elder disciples of Nichiren Shonin, wrote extracted passages from the Sho Hokke Daimoku Sho, and placed them in the Nanjo Hyohei Shichiro Dono Gosho, a letter to Lord Nanjo Hoyo Shichiro. So his disciple wrote a letter, and he put portions of this letter, quoted portions of this letter, into that other letter. And this indicates that the original writing of the Sho Hokke Daimoku Sho already existed then, a copy made by Gyogakuin Nicho of Mount Minobu in 1422 to 1500. So this is about 200 years after Nichiren. There's, it was still being used. Okay, so let's get started, if we shall. All right. This writing was written in question and answer format, which was a device frequently employed by Nichiren in many of his letters, especially letters where he is refuting commonly held views or arguments against his teachings. So it's written in question format, and so Nichiren creates an imaginary character. And sometimes the imaginary character is meant to represent someone else. So sometimes he disguised his imaginary character as a political official, or maybe a high-ranking religious leader. So he And then what he does is he puts into the voice of the imaginary character, the questioner. Sometimes he says it's a traveler. Sometimes, I'm trying to think. I think the most common one that I find endearing is that it's a traveler that has stopped by and visited Nichiren, and they get into a discussion. Just like, at night they're having tea and they're just kind of, talking. It reminds me of when I was younger in the military and stationed in Hawaii. And I had 3 really good friends. I mean, the barracks in Hawaii was an open squad bay barracks, which means that everybody lived in the same big room and you had no privacy. And once I became an NCO, once you're E5, then you get to go into a separate section, which is still an open bay, but it's a lot less populated. So there might be 20 people in that end, and maybe 80 people in the other end. So there was 3 of us. One guy was a Mormon, very active young Mormon, and then another guy was not Hare Krishna, but I forget what it is. But anyway, he was some other kind of, it was before the New Age concept, but that sort of New Age kind of religion that was popular at the time. And for the life of me, I can't remember now. Anyway, so the 3 of us were very active in our religions and very respectful of each other, constantly quizzing each other and having discussions. And we all rode bicycles. And to get off the base at Kaneohe, you ride your bicycle or drive down a real long stretch of pretty isolated highway. It almost makes Kaneohe Marine Corps Base like an island. It's more, so it's this long causeway that connects Kaneohe, the base, to Kaneohe town. And so we'd all head out from the barracks after our work in the afternoon, after we got finished eating at the chow hall, and we'd head out on our bicycles. And then once we got off base, we'd go in various directions, depending upon where our meetings were and stuff. And then late at night, we'd be all back at the barracks, not at the same time, but we'd all be back at the barracks, and we'd be sitting around on our bunks, and we'd just have these really long religious conversations, philosophical conversations, not necessarily trying to convert, but just exploring each other's religion. It was just a really wonderful experience to be able to engage in these kinds of conversations with these other 2 guys. And anyway, so when Nichiren invents a traveler, I'm always thinking about how in my youth, sitting around the barracks on our racks and, talking religion. So anyway, he puts questions that maybe they're objections that are common in societal conversations, you might say, or maybe they're, sometimes they're as overheard, or like in this particular instance, the questioner, the imaginary person, says, "A wise man once told me," or "I heard a wise man say," and then Nichiren uses the guest or the questioner as a spokesperson for the various objections that are occurring in relation to what he's teaching, and and this was useful when many of his detractors chose not to engage him directly, or when rumors were being spread by various individuals. So he could gather all these up, and Nichiren was famous for being an excellent debater. I don't know that he ever lost a debate. In fact, one of the icons that you see in Nichiren statues is he's holding what looks like a stick. And it really is, it's a talking stick. And so in formal debates, if you didn't have the stick, you couldn't talk. And so since he was renowned for his debating skills and his ability to win any debate that he was ever in, that is the icon that we associate with Nichiren. So frequently he'll be holding the talking stick and a scroll in the other hand. And so the scroll represents the Lotus Sutra, and the stick represents the talking stick, his debate skills. So, so a lot of people didn't want to engage him, and because, you know, they'd lose. It's also an effective way to honor the voices of others while offering counter arguments. It doesn't dismiss the views who may frequently of others who may frequently only have been misled and not be malicious in their intent. So someone may hold a false view, and maybe they're confused because they heard this priest say something, and now they're hearing Nichiren say something, and they just don't know which way to believe. And so you don't want to diminish or dismiss that person because they're really seeking. And so when you give them voice, it empowers them, and it's a very respectful way to engage in correcting someone's misguided beliefs. Any questions? Okay, you have any thoughts, comments, questions?
No, not at the moment. I think it's pretty clear so far what you're saying. I do like the talking stick. I didn't know that. I've seen that in a lot of depictions. I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. Okay, so now we have question one. And actually question one is a little bit longer than this, not a whole lot. I didn't cut out a lot, but it starts out slow. Some of the other questions get really, really long. Anyway, so these are some of the quotes that are taken from this. Suppose ordinary people, actually, Trey, why don't you read?
Okay. Suppose ordinary people, priests or laypersons, uphold, read, and write, or let others read and write the entire Lotus Sutra without understanding its meaning.
Keep going.
Suppose there are people who, though they do not read and write the sutra themselves, show respect by pressing their palms together in the form of gasho, bow in front of it, offer incense and flowers to it. Can such people, due to their own merit of having practiced a little, avoid committing worldly sins and be reborn in the realms of human and heavenly beings, just as Hinayana sages on the first stage of sainthood are always reborn in the realms of human and gods, without falling into the three evil realms? Hell, realm of hungry souls, and that of beasts and birds? Can they in the end perceive the Lotus Sutra or be reborn in the Pure Lands all over the universe or become Buddhas with their present bodies?
Okay. Summarize that. What are you taking away out of this? What are you getting from this?
That there's a question about whether or not the teachings of the Lotus Sutra apply to everyone. Once again, it's kind of like a, really? Everybody? That's what it kind of seems like to me.
Okay. And also that perhaps even just a little bit of respect, even without knowing anything, just saying, wow, that, it's a Buddha's teachings, I respect it.
Yeah.
Would that person, the question, would that person get benefit? Would they be protected from falling into the evil realms? So would a person who only offers the minimum, what we would consider a bare minimum of reverence to this teaching, would they be protected? And one might guess that, maybe an alternate view is that if that were true, then a person who really understood and really offered great reverence and did many good things in their practice and had strong practice and faith, that they would also be protected, or maybe even be protected more so. And also, I'm going to switch the slide here. So The answer is those who possess even the slightest belief in the Lotus Sutra without holding any enmity against its teachings will not fall into the evil realms, even if they commit evil deeds. You know, looking ahead, I know some of where this is going. The idea is that this Lotus Sutra is a really hard thing to practice and to understand. You know, the Buddha repeatedly says this is the most difficult of all of his teachings, and so some of the argument out in society, some of the gossip that's going on, some of the complaints about this is that it's too hard, and so, you know, maybe people shouldn't practice it. And that was actually some of the arguments that other priests from other denominations would throw out, is that this is too hard for people, it's inappropriate, and you know, we should teach them something easier. And so what Nichiren is, you know, the groundwork he's laying here is that even just a little bit of respect yields this protection, that even the slightest belief in the Lotus Sutra, without holding any enmity against its teachings, will not fall into the evil realms, even if they commit evil deeds. Any thoughts on that? I'm putting you on the spot tonight because you're the only one here.
I know. I think you actually clarified it rather well by, you know, saying that it's, you know, kind of getting to the idea that what's going on here is, even if it's just a little bit compared to a lot, it's still about respect, as you had mentioned. And it's not like, you know, coming up against it and trying to be aggressive toward it, or, you know, like the detractors sort of were, like saying it was too difficult and things of that nature.
Yeah, and even someone who, you know, maybe they have limited capacity, maybe they have limited exposure. You know, this is a time before the internet and a time before mass-produced books, because every book was written by hand. This is a time before all of that, and so, you know, the availability of information was rather limited and primarily relied on word of mouth. And so maybe someone only knows one little passage from the Lotus Sutra, and they don't know anything else because they're too busy farming rice or, you know, managing fishing or something like that. And so, you know, they don't have a lot of time to engage in deep study and deep reflection and exploration and understanding. And so even just a little bit of respect and even just a little bit of understanding yields great benefit. Okay. So let me talk here about, this is not directly in this passage, but it's some background information. And this is, so, you know, good friends and bad friends in Buddhism are a little bit different than what we might think of as good friends and bad friends in society. So Zen Shishiki is the term for a good Buddhist friend, or good friend from Buddhist perspective. And unlike society, good friends may seem as bad social friends. And good friends, the definition, what makes a good friend is a person who ultimately leads one to Buddhism or to strengthen one's faith and practice. So in society, say, for example, you know, you want to go out and party. And you've got a choice between partying and reciting the sutra, or skipping your practice for the day. So a good society friend would be, hey, come on, Trey, let's go to the party. You know, that might seem like a good friend because they want you to have fun. They want you to be with them and stuff like that. But from a Buddhist perspective, that good guy is actually a bad guy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so an akushishiki is a bad friend from a Buddhist perspective. And unlike social bad friends, they may seem as social good friends. So So I just had a pop-up thing. I don't. I hope it doesn't show up on the video. So an akushishiki is ultimately leads one away from Buddhism or from Buddhist faith. So, you know, when we talk about good friends and bad friends, it's has two different meanings in a Buddhist, from a Buddhist perspective and a societal perspective or social perspective. So a bad friend from a Buddhist perspective would be the guy who wants you to go to the party and, you know, come on, Trey, let's skip your prayers and let's go partying. And but from a society perspective, social perspective, that sounds like fun and a good friend. But from a Buddhist perspective, it's not so good. That clear?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Nichiren says that if someone is swayed by an evil or bad friend and then abandon their faith or convert to other teachings, never to return to the Lotus Sutra for the duration of their lives, they may end up falling into hell. That's why I wanted to introduce the concept of evil or bad friend and show how someone who is fun socially might be a bad friend. So like when I was in the Marine Corps, the three of us were, from a Buddhist perspective, good Buddhist friends. And for us, we were good social friends because for us, social activities meant going to our meetings and doing our prayers and stuff like that. So it worked out. But the rest of the barracks was not so keen on that. At one end of the barracks, there was a real heavy heroin addict who was actually a dealer. And, you know, the Marine Corps turned a blind eye to that at the time. You know, this is during Vietnam, and they didn't really care as long as you were willing to kill somebody. They didn't really care if you were high or not. And there was lots of drugs in the barracks. I mean, actually, he sold just about every kind of drug you could think of at the time. People would be traipsing up there to buy acid and, you know, marijuana. And I mean, he had a little den, you know, tent in this little, locker area. You know, everything was divided by wall lockers. And so, you know, we had divided area, but it was all open bay. But he had, you know, like blankets over everything. And you go in there. It's really kind of strange. So that was at one end of the barracks. And, you know, everybody had their stereos blasting. It was a cacophony of mixed rock and roll and all kinds of stuff going on at the time. And so in that environment, that's how I learned to meditate. So when people say, you know, have a quiet environment and all that stuff, it's like, you know, that's a luxury for some people. Okay, so there's no punishment. This is a note. There's no punishment for abandoning faith. There's no punishment for not practicing Buddhism. There's just no good cause being made. And there's no protection from going astray and making harmful causes. So that's the thing here, is that Nichiren isn't saying that you'll be punished for it. The Lotus Sutra doesn't say, you know, that you'll be punished. You're just not going to make good causes. So your good fortune stops, and you know, you're just not replacing anything. And so sometimes people say, well, if you quit practicing, bad things will happen to you. Well, they don't happen because you quit practicing. They just happen because you're not making those good causes so much anymore. You're not doing the things to ameliorate your prior causes that would, you know, cause you to suffer. Any questions, comments, thoughts? How are you doing?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I know that, you know, in a lot of other, more theistic religions, of course, there's always a kind of punishment point of view if you're to stop upholding or doing whatever these practices are. And this puts it in a way where it doesn't seem coercive. It's kind of like, it's up to you if you want to create the good causes and make them in your life. But if you don't, then you don't. And you can't, really expect to have, good effects if you're not making good causes, is kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. It, people say, oh, well, I miss, doing my prayers this morning. I hope nothing bad happens to me. Well, I hope nothing bad happens to you also. But if it does, it's not because you didn't do your prayers. It's because maybe you were careless, or it's your turn, who knows what. But it's not just because you didn't practice. People come to Buddhism with a lot of guilt, a lot of previous teachings about, if you don't do this, you're going to go someplace bad. If you don't do this, something's going to happen to you. And Buddhism is really radical in that sense, that no, nothing bad happens to you if you don't practice. It's not a result of not practicing. It's not a result of not having faith. It's just a result of doing unskillful things. And when we practice, we are able to change our karma. We are able to change the effects to some degree from our previous causes. But the biggest change comes from learning to act differently. Karma is not just what happens to us. It's actually what we do. Karma is a verb. It's not a noun, as most people use it. Oh, that's my karma. No, it's not. It's the accumulation of all your previous causes. Your karma is what you're going to do about it right now. That bad thing happened, and what are you going to do? Or this good thing happened, and what are you going to do? Are you going to keep doing the same things that made it happen in the first place? That's karma. Are you going to change and do something more skillful to ensure that those bad things quit happening? That's karma. It's not just a matter of that life sucks and there's nothing I can do about it. The first noble truth is life sucks. Or that's a paraphrase. There's suffering in life. Yes, there is. A lot of it we cause ourselves. Just being born is a major cause for suffering, because we're going to die. We're going to get sick. If we're lucky, we'll get old. But we're all going to die, and that's suffering. And what the Four Noble Truths say is life sucks. Yeah, it's your fault. It's your fault you're suffering. There's a way to stop it from happening. Get off your butt and do the Eightfold Path. So life sucks. It's your fault. You can do something about it. You got to do the Eightfold Path. That's the start. Start making different kind of causes. We can't change the past necessarily, but we can certainly affect the future. And when we learn to make better causes for the things that happen to us, then we can change our future. Okay, minimize the... Any thoughts, comments, questions before we go on? We're not in any big hurry. I don't have a big chunk set aside for this.
Yeah, I just feel like it's a rather practical approach. And I like how you're, kind of explaining karma, because I noticed that in the general context, as you said, people will say things like, I fell and, broke my elbow or something. I have horrible karma. And it's kind of like, I agree that that's not what it's meant.
Yeah. Okay. So moving right along here. Okay, this is from Chi, Tiantai. And this is from the Moho Chi Kwan. And the translation of that, clear serenity, quiet insight. This is Chi's masterwork. And I'm quoting here, you are able, through only a little giving and a little upholding of the precepts, to surpass the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. And this isn't in Nichiren's thing. This is sort of background. But it does inform, because Nichiren was a Tiantai scholar. And so, this informed Nichiren, and, he doesn't always spell out everything that informs him. And so having this all translated in English is a great opportunity, because it allows us to delve into how was Nichiren's thought formed? What's the foundation for his thinking? And the fact that he mastered all of Tiantai's teachings is phenomenal, because I'm struggling with just a little bit of it. So anyway, you are able, through only a little giving and a little upholding of those precepts, to surpass the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. So the Shravakas, I don't know where you are on your Lotus Sutra study, the Shravakas are the learners. And the Pratyeka Buddhas are the meditators, the self-enlightened. And the problem with Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas is that they're primarily oriented to self. Self-improvement, self-enlightenment, and their focus of their activities and practice, is either through learning or meditation, or religious practices. But it's not geared outward. And those people do get a lot of benefit, a lot of merit from their effort. Perhaps not as much or the same degree as Bodhisattva, but a Bodhisattva cannot neglect the Sravaka and Pratyeka Buddha practices. We learn in chapter 2 that there's not 3 different paths. There's one, and the one is Buddhahood, and the one encompasses the Sravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, and Bodhisattva. So the Bodhisattva takes the Sravaka and Pratyeka Buddha practices and focuses them outward, is a way to think about it. So you are able, through only a little giving and a little upholding of the precepts, to surpass the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, not only in merit, but also in understanding and faith. So again, so why would a bodhisattva practice a little giving? We might ask ourselves, well, why just do a little bit? And there's a couple of reasons. Maybe they just started. Maybe they just became aroused to seek enlightenment. And so that's all they know. So all they can do is give a little. And we can see that, oops, what happened? We can see that you're able, through only a little giving and a little upholding of the precepts, to surpass the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. So it's not contingent upon how much you know or how much you're able to give, but on the intent, your spirit, the fact that a person who's just beginning can only give a little bit. It's not possible to give more than what they have. Another reason that Tiantai or Chi says is that a bodhisattva may foresee that if he receives too much, he might break the precepts by acquiring too much wealth, and thus require only a little giving on the part of his donor. So bodhisattvas are capable of seeing the impact of the causes. The more skillful we are, the more able we are able to predict what will happen as a result of certain causes. And sometimes I'll say, I know in conversation with people, I'll say, I'm trying to think of an example, an exact example. But what I'll say is, don't give me too much, because that would be too much of a burden on me. You know, like oh well, my boss she went out of her way to make sure that I felt appreciated on my last job, and she would nominate me for awards and special compensations and things like that. And I said, Terry, don't give me too much. It becomes a burden then, So do you understand? Does that make sense?
It does.
Huh?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure. It may sound silly or facetious, but sometimes when we receive too much, it's like, it's a big weight. And how do we carry that? How do I carry the praise that she would give to me? How do I carry that? How do I carry it and remain humble? How do I carry it and not become arrogant? How do I carry it and not let it go to my head? So, it becomes a real burden, and I feel it. And so Terry, I said, I feel appreciated. Please, I mean, we were very close, and we could speak to each other very frankly. And I'd say, it becomes a burden. And she would say, how so? And so then I would explain to her. One of my supervisors when I was actively, undergoing training and education to be a chaplain, we would engage in conversation. She says, how is that possible? And I'd say, well, I don't know, from a Christian perspective, I don't know from a Western perspective, but I know that the way I've been brought up and my faith is that, if I take on more, if I take on too much, or if I receive too much, then I'm burdened with carrying it, with living up to the expectations, with all kinds of things. And she said, well, that's just your guilt, or that's just, your fear. And I said, no, it's more than that. I have a part of my faith is repaying my debt of gratitude to all my teachers, not only her, and this is a different person from my supervisor, not only her, repay my debt of gratitude to her, but all my previous teachers. And how do I do that? And if I'm given this burden, then is it possible for me to keep repaying gratitude, or does it stop? And I said, this is the path that I walk, and maybe I'm obsessing, but that is my nature, and that is who I am. And her counter argument is that you're too steeped in guilt and all this other stuff. And I'd say, well, I said, you can name it what you want, but that's not what I see. I see that I have a deep sense of gratitude, and I want to make sure that I repay it, and I want to make sure that I uphold my own beliefs, and they're hard enough as it is, and I don't need more burden. So anyway, it's just a matter of a person's perspective. I don't want to become arrogant. I don't want to become perverted in my faith. So it's important to me. So I share that with you. So these are reasons why a bodhisattva might practice a little giving. They might practice a little giving in restraint for the reward that they may receive. I was conscious of, so in the hospital, I stood out because I wore my robe, and I was a little bit different. I wasn't a Christian, and people would I like to talk to people. I knew all the housekeepers. I'd stop and talk to them. I find out who's having a baby and whose daughter's going to college, and all of these kinds of things. And people would share intimate details of their life, and I would care about them, and inquire and things like that. And so I had a relationship with these people. but I had to make sure that it wasn't seen as being better than my peers who would not engage in those kinds of conversations. It's not a better than, it's just a different from. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, you know, I'm aware that people will be watching this, and hopefully it makes sense to the people who watch the recording. Oops. Okay, so where were we? Okay, is that the last? That's the last slide. So I'm going to stop the share. And is there any slides that you would like to see again?
I think I got the notes off of the ones that.
That's right. I sent you the
Yeah.
slide package. So. Yes.
But I was also taking notes from the lecture part and then filling in the words there off the slides. But I'm good now.
Okay, good. I've got this thing here, and I can never. Is that no? I've got this text box that's popped up, and oh, I don't know where it is. How to get rid of this? Okay, it went away when I went on full screen. Okay. All right. So sorry, you can't see what I'm doing here, but I had to get rid of some kind of text box. I can never, it pops up and then I can never get rid of it. And then I also wanted to get it so we're side by side and I could see you, stuff like that. Okay, what time is it? It is 8 o'clock. So we've got a half an hour. And so that's just question one. And then we have more questions. There are a total of bunches of questions. And I think there's, so this is, yeah, we've got 7, 8, 9, 11, 12. It's a long writing. It's from page 1 to 26 of pretty dense type. So, and of course it's not light reading. Next study, and that will not be next week because next week I'll be in Paris. And while it might be physically possible for me to do a lecture, it would be at 1 o'clock in the morning in Paris time in order to be our regular 7 o'clock here. And I don't want to take that on. So we'll and I'm not sure that I'll be up to snuff the following week. I have it on the schedule, but I may have to cancel. Just depends on how tired. I anticipate being very tired because my schedule in Paris is pretty much nonstop from the time I get there. Well, the first day I arrive, I just settle into the hotel. You can't check in until 3 o'clock. So I'll just get settled into the hotel. Then the next day, I'll be going out to one of the suburbs outside of Paris and visiting a member who's gravely ill. And so I'll be spending time with her. And then I'll come back. That's Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I'll be preparing the materials, going to the print shop and having things printed for the retreat. The packets for the people participating in the retreat. And then Friday it all starts. Originally it was just going to be from Saturday noon till 8 o'clock. And it's kind of expanded as stuff over 3 days now, and which is good. Everybody's really excited. I'm excited. It's turned out to be better than my original expectations. So anyway, so I hate to commit to the Tuesday after I come back. I come back on Monday, it'll be late at night. You know, I'm 70. I need some rest. So I may take that Tuesday off. Anyway, we'll see. I have put on the calendar the rough time schedule for the Paris retreat, and I will fill in the specific details for each of the events during the retreat on the calendar, so that you can look at it, and it'll show according to Eastern Standard Time, even though I'm entering it in as Paris time. That's the nice thing about Google Calendar. Okay, so you know, this writing, this is really important. What we've talked about, it may seem elementary, it may seem simple, but it's really crucial, because from here Nichiren moves into discussing the benefit of the 50th removed. And we learn about this in the Lotus Sutra, that if one person tells another person of the great benefit or joy that they receive from practicing, and then that person tells another person, and then that person tells another person, another person, another person, another person. So you've got 50, the 50th person. So like 50 generations later, someone has just heard, you know, I heard about someone who's got this religion. It's really made them happy. That 50th person receives tremendous benefit for praising the Lotus Sutra, even though they know nothing about the Lotus Sutra. That's you know, the importance, the significance of what the Buddha has given us in this sutra, this teaching, that it is so profound that even just, you know, what we would think not possible, that it can benefit that 50th person who doesn't know diddly about the Lotus Sutra. And so Nichiren talks about that. And if this, what we just covered tonight, was not true, then the idea of the 50th removed couldn't be true. You see? So if you, as a relatively new practitioner, you know, if you just tell somebody, you know, I've been chanting this thing and it really makes me feel good, and maybe that's all you knew, and you would receive tremendous benefit, and so would they. Well, if what we talked about tonight wasn't true, and if that wasn't true, then this idea of the 50th removed wouldn't be true. And then we go on to another question, is, and this is what I was talking about, you know, as a kind of a teaser on this, is that when we practice and other people praise us, you know, if you and Sean, you know, are doing something together, and Sean says, you know, since you've been practicing this thing, and Sean's Episcopalian, and so Sean says, you know, you've really, I really like it when you're practicing, you know. I mean, maybe he doesn't, but if he did, then he gets the same benefit that you do. And so when we practice, we're not just practicing for ourselves, we're practicing for all the people we interact with. When you go to Walmart or whatever grocery store chain you have down there, and you smile at the clerk, and you cause them even a little teensy weensy little bit of joy, it may seem like they're just, that you've caused the joy, but really it's your Buddha that's interacting with their Buddha, and so you give them great benefit through your practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's only theory, you know.
No, I was making sure to write it down, because I was trying to. You said the 50th removed. It's the 50th removed is what it was called.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's called various things, but I forget which chapter it's in. Let's see if he's got it. He's got it in here. I've got so much stuff marked up. Let's see. I'm looking here. Oh, okay. So this is from, okay, he talks about here, you also regard the 50th person who rejoices for a moment at hearing the sutra transmitted. So Nichiren says in here a little bit later, this is on question 2. So we'll get to this next time we study. and this is the 18th, chapter 18 in the Lotus Sutra. So he says here, does this mean our moment of rejoicing at hearing the Lotus Sutra in the latter age of degeneration is not the same as the rejoicing at hearing it preached in the 18th chapter? Are we supposed to disregard? So this is the questioner asking Nichiren, should we set this aside? And Nichiren comes back later and says, absolutely not. You know, that this is all tied together. So look at chapter 18 in your Lotus Sutra. Which translation are you using?
I have the Reeves translation.
Okay, that's good. That's good. You don't have to apologize. Yeah.
I know that you like the Murano one.
No. The Murano is the official Nichiren Shu translation.
Oh, okay.
And I have unlimited quoting rights for the Murano. Any other translation, and then it gets complicated with copyright law. But Nichiren Shu priests are granted, wholesale. We can copy and quote and not have to get permission because we've got blanket permission to do that. Now we can't reprint the whole thing. I couldn't just type it up and print out my own copy, but I can quote liberally from it without, seeking special copyright permission. Whereas if I quote someone else's, I'm limited to, very short quotations without having to go get copyright stuff. I really, I like the new Hurwitz, Leon Hurwitz translation, the one with the red cover. I really like that. But again, I can't freely quote from it. And so anyway, the Reeves is great. I like Gene Reeves. A lot of people, so did I send you the link from my blog comparing the various translations of the Lotus Sutra?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'll have to make sure you have the link for that. And for those who are watching this, you just have to search for it because I'm not going to put it in the comments. You'll just have to look for it on my blog. You can put Lotus Sutra comparison and see what comes up. Or just put comparisons and you may strike lucky. But yeah, so what I do is I offer my comparison of all the sutras, all the translations. And Gene Reeves wrote a comment, and I left it on there so you can see Gene Reeves' comment. Because I commented favorably about his translation. I do point out some of the criticisms that others have with it. But, in my Lotus Sutra practice guide, the 35-day practice guide, I actually use page numbers from his translation alongside the Murano page numbers. And, if I use page numbers, then I can get away with it. The problem with using page numbers is that if an edition changes and the page numbers change, so yeah, it's complicated. I understand everybody's desire to possess their intellectual labor. That makes sense. I don't disagree with that. I just wish there was another way that teachers could promote other translations. Because I think it's a good translation. Even the Watson gets derided a lot by many Nichiren Buddhists. The Watson is the translation that was sponsored by the Soka Gakkai. It's great. If you're reading any of them, going back to this writing, if you're reading any of them, it's wonderful. It's better than nothing. And we're not scraping the barrel just because you're reading the Watson translation. But we have to understand that each translation, none of them are perfect. Each translation has shortcomings. And you kind of have to read more than one translation to get a general feel. Do you speak another language?
No.
Okay. So, I kind of rusty on my Japanese, but I speak Japanese, and I have residual memory of French and a little bit. And no language translates exactly, from one language to the other language. I mean, you can come close. Google Translate does pretty good from French to English and English to French. It butchers English to Japanese and Japanese to English. A lot of it depends on whether a language is pronoun rich or pronoun deprived, and Japanese is pronoun completely deficient. Pronouns just don't exist, and so it kind of messes things up. But no language translates equal from one to another. You have to do workarounds, like I was telling you about. The idiom "kiss ass" or "brown nose." And in Japanese that roughly comes out to be "gomasuri," which is grind sesame seeds, which I'm not going to go into it here, but so that's the problem. When you just rely on only one translation, you're getting that translator's interpretation. And that's why I always encourage people to read the translator's notes. Whatever is in the front of the book before the book begins is a must read, because most of the time, especially in these religious texts, the translator will give you his philosophy for translating, for making certain decisions, because decisions must be made. How are we going to rephrase this thing? The Chinese doesn't have any pronouns. There's no tense in Chinese grammar. And so, if you put the Chinese text up against the Japanese text, you come out with two different things, because the Japanese insert tense, past tense, present tense, and so on and so forth. They don't put any pronouns in. When you put it into English, then you have to put the pronouns in, because we can't figure it out if you don't have a pronoun in there. So that he said this and she said that. Well, that's not in the Chinese. The Chinese doesn't tell you if it happened yesterday or if it's going to happen tomorrow. It just tells you a thing, ball throw, but it doesn't tell you, was the ball thrown, or are we throwing it? We will throw it. It just says ball throw. And that's, a kind of a, maybe not a good example, but it kind of illustrates. So, when, we say, Ji ga tokubutsurai sho kyo sho koshu for chapter 16, Ji ga ge. The Japanese is ware hotoge oite yori. So when the Japanese read the sutra, that's what they sound like. And as priests, we have to learn to say it in English for us Americans. We have to learn to say it in Japanese, and we have to learn to say it in the Chinese the Shindoku that we use. So it's important to read as many translations as you can. And when you're first beginning, that's a pretty big hurdle. So, never apologize for, I'm just using the Reeves. It's like, no, I'm using the Reeves translation. It's like, you're doing something. That's wonderful. Maybe 10 years from now, you'll get another translation. I mean, they're expensive. You can find them in used books and stuff like that. And they're hard. Some of them are really hard to read, almost impossible. And some of them are just unavailable. It's really hard to get some, like, I forget which one it is I've got, but it was done in 1800s. It was translated from French. It's English translation. And it's difficult to read. But when you put all of these together, one thing that you can see is that not all the Lotus Sutra translations are constructed the same. There is significant argument that some of the chapters, the Devadatta, in some of the translations, Devadatta chapter doesn't even exist. And that's because, and I think that's the French one, and the French one came from Russian, and they didn't have that. So that translation doesn't have it. And there are many scholars that say it doesn't really belong in the Lotus Sutra to begin with. It's out of place. But from Nichiren's perspective, it was there. And that was his belief. And that was where he taught from. And so that's what we teach. That's the direction that we teach from. But I like to make people aware that there are alternative views, sort of like Terry Pratchett. There's all kinds of universes, you know. So, yeah. And, you know, I don't believe that weakens someone's faith. Some people, it may shake their faith to find out that something might not be supposed to be there, you know. But from my perspective, for me, it's like, yeah, okay, I can hold those two contradictory things. And that's, I think as Buddhists, we learn the skill of being able to hold two contradictory things, to be able to walk in the in-between, the gray space. You know, I would tell my Christian chaplains, I said, you know, if you want to understand Buddhism, just think about the gray space. It's not black, it's not white, but all that stuff in between. So it's not dual, you know, it's not duality, it's not non-duality, it's the in-between. It's not non-duality, it's in-between. And people would say, well, how do you get between, you know, duality and non-duality? What's in between that? Well, what's in between that is both of them, you know? And so anyway, we're way off the subject here. So your reading of the Reeves translation is wonderful. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to apologize for. It's great. You know, it's not second to Murano. It's just different from Murano. If you were reading the Watson version, you know, some people in Nichiren Shu may deride you for reading the Watson version. Some people in Kempo and Hokke Kai may deride you for reading the Murano version. That's their stuff. My stuff is whatever you're reading. It's better than not reading anything. And let's celebrate that and let's work with it. So, yeah, I don't have time to be stuck, you know, to be, you know, I'm closed-minded about enough things. Like, you know, I'm closed-minded. I don't like corn, okay, unless it's popped. I don't like steamed corn. I don't like cooked corn. I don't like raw corn. I like popcorn. That's it. I'm stuck there, you know. I'm rigid, but I'm rigid about those things. I don't like cheese unless it's Kraft's Life cheese. You know, the only fish I like is fish sticks. Okay, I'm weird, but that's me. So you're reading the Reeves translation. Yay! Okay.
Right.
What are your thoughts? What's going through your head?
Just that I have, wow, like I guess when I start to think about it, I realize that, you know, we're just touching on the tip of how many teachings there are as far as like in the Gosho and in the Sutra. And it's overwhelming, but in a good way, because I feel like it'd be maybe not for somebody that's been doing it for 30 or 40 years, but it's going to be difficult for me to get bored. Very difficult.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that.
So here's something for you, and for anybody who may be watching this is, you know, this can seem like an awful lot, and it might seem like I know a lot, but you know, I didn't to begin with. To begin with, all I knew was I'm going to take this scroll back to the barracks, put it in this wooden box that I've got under my arm. The scroll was in my shirt. The wooden box was under my arm. I'm going to take it back to my wall locker and I'm going to hang it up, and I don't know diddly about it except that, okay, oneness of self and environment, oneness of body and mind. That's about all I knew. and it was cool. So, you know, we start someplace. Now, how do you get more? 20 minutes a day. That may seem like nothing, but set your clock, set your determination to every day. Just read for 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be deep study. It doesn't have to be complex. Just read 20 minutes, something from Buddhism, preferably something from Nichiren Buddhism. Pick something. You've got the lecture on the Lotus Sutra. Just read for 20 minutes. You don't have to read a whole chapter. You don't have to read 100 pages. Just read 20 minutes. And if in 20 minutes you only go through 2 or 3 pages, I don't know your reading speed, that's great. Here's the thing, 20 minutes a day over a year of time equals roughly 100 hours of study. Now, can you imagine setting aside 100 hours of diligent study all at once? I couldn't. I'm not that dedicated. But over the years, 50 years of roughly 20 minutes every day, or roughly every day, most every day, 20 minutes, that's a huge amount of time. That's like 5,000 hours, okay? So if I've studied that much, then I ought to know something, So, whatever knowledge you think I have, it's not great. It didn't just happen. I wasn't born with it. And, you can do the same. Anybody can do the same. Anybody can do more. You'll probably do more than I, have done. If you stick with it in your lifetime, you'll probably accomplish a lot more than me. And that's great. That'd be wonderful, I think. So, don't feel intimidated. Don't feel like, oh gosh, I'll never get all this. It's just too much to study. Take it in little bites. Now, I was lucky in a way. When I first began, there wasn't anything to study. A book here, a book there, newspaper article here. There just wasn't a lot. There were several books to read. I won't say there was nothing, but it was rather limited. And over time, more and more things are available. And quite frankly, there's a lot of stuff that I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that's been published that I haven't read. I don't have time to read. I don't have any desire to read. My big shortcoming is that I know the Lotus Sutra. I don't know much about anything else. I'm not like some teachers that, know all these other sutras. I don't. That's my deficiency. I just know the Lotus Sutra. That's what I know. And if you want to know about something else, go see somebody else. If you want to know about the Lotus Sutra, you can go see somebody else too, or you can come see me. But I can't tell you what all the other non-Nichiren. I can tell you what all the Nichiren denominations believe, but I can't tell you a lot about Jodo. I can tell you a little bit about Jodo, a little bit about Zen, but I can't get deep into their doctrine and their philosophy. I've not studied it. I can't get deep into Pali, the Pali Canon, Hinayana teachings. I've not studied it. I guess my view is let me try to understand the Lotus Sutra first, and I'm still figuring it out. So when I get it figured out, then I'll go study something else. I'll probably be dead. So don't worry about how much you know or how little you know or how much there is to study. So a person coming in to Buddhism now, it can be mind-boggling because there's just so much information available. Where do you start? Well, the good thing about picking a denomination and studying with a teacher, whether it's me or someone else, is that you're going to have a place to begin, a reference point, and you can branch out. You're not required to just only study what I teach or, what I know. You have so much more available to you. But it's a good place to start, unless you find something else you'd rather start. 20 minutes a day. Just do it for a year. And a year from now, if we make a date, and a year from now, if you do 20 minutes a day, a year from now, and I played this back, I think you would be very impressed with where you are. So, yeah, it's hard. I know. It's fun. I think it's fun, So maybe not everybody does. I have a limited life experience. I didn't go out partying much, that kind of stuff. My partner, when we first started going together, he'd say, we weren't living together at the time, and this was in Hawaii, and he'd come over to the house where I was renting, and he'd come over and say, I can always depend. Whenever I come over here, you're going to be reading. So, yeah. I'm never much of a social animal, but I read. So that's just me. There's a lot of stuff I don't know. A lot of stuff I haven't experienced. I mean, I have some, but I have my own experiences. But there's a lot of stuff that people can talk about that I have no clue, no personal firsthand experience. There's things that you could talk about that I have no personal firsthand experience. And isn't that wonderful? Yeah, I think it is. Anyway, so I've blabbered on long enough here. And what time is it? It is 3 minutes left. You get the final word.
The final word. So like I was just gonna say that when it comes to this particular Gosho or this study lecture, which is the first one I've attended, that I like where it's going, and I like the approach of it, and I'm kind of just now beginning to study the Lotus Sutra. So I find this to be very helpful because it's very encouraging, but at the same time, as you said, respectful as well. And it reminds us that, yes, the Lotus Sutra has all these benefits and everything that come with it, but not to be arrogant about it. This is important, and to, really be respectful about, because I know it's difficult today, especially with other schools, to be, respectful and understanding that, it's still the Lotus Sutra, as you were saying. So even reading it or expounding it just a little is better than none at all. So I've been kind of thinking about some of that in my mind. That's important.
Thank you. So you had mentioned that you liked the approach, the study, whatever. And I like to hold people to things. So can you name one thing about the way I presented it? One fault or one good about the way the presentation was given tonight? Feedback, positive or negative?
I think I really actually have some positive feedback. I can't think of anything negative. I did like the PowerPoint presentation. It was really helpful to have visual aid. And I also liked the breakdown into more layman's terms. You tend to do that with your books as well. And I like it a lot because some of us, some of the words I'll recognize, but it takes my mind a couple minutes to come back around to remembering what that meant if it was, a foreign word. But when you put it in English like you do, it's very easy to grab a hold of and write down, and not having to go back and be like, how do you spell that again? So.
Well, good. Thank you. Thank you for that. I do try to make this user-friendly. When I first began, it was all foreign words. Nobody said anything in English. And we had all these, Eshofuni and Shikishinfuni and all these funis. And being someone who recognizes the utility of jargon and yet doesn't like jargon because it alienates, it creates others when we use a lot of jargon. Yeah, it kind of makes it like you're an in crowd and, I can spout off all these things. but it's really not inviting. So thank you for that. I continue. If I don't do that, say something. You know, if I, breeze over something and you don't know what I just got finished saying, ask, because maybe I need to be, need to be stopped. And so, yeah, feel free to do that. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Let's chant O Daimoku 3 times together, and then I'll stop the recording. All right. Thank you for joining tonight. And for those who watch the video later, hopefully you get something out of it. Hopefully it wasn't too distracting or too flighty. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. And for those watching the hats, because it's cold in here, I try to keep the heat low so that I can afford it. It gets expensive gas, so yeah. All right.